powerful ripple effects throughout an entire community. I'll give you an example. Right now I'm working a case that involves a man from India who subscribes to the Sikh faith. He was in his driveway in March of 2017 when someone came up to him and said something to the effect of, "Why don't you go back to your own country?" And then they shot him. Now, he happened to be okay, thankfully, but within 24 hours, every media outlet from here to India was carrying that story. And Sikhs everywhere had some very real concerns about their safety. I'm sure many of you have heard about the JCC bomb threats. Okay. So in that situation, someone actually was arrested, and it's a person that the media is describing as a maladjusted youth, a teen with maybe some psychological problems. I'm not a clinician. It's not my job to diagnose. What I do know is that whether that individual had the capability or the actual intent to carry through on some of those bomb threats is almost irrelevant, because the effect on the community is devastating. Okay? And that's a fact that's not lost on me, and it's not lost on the FBI, and I'm sure it's not lost on any of you. Oops.
That's better. People can't really hear you.
Okay. It's almost too much.
I can turn down the volume if you talk.
No, that's fine. You know, my sister-in-law, who lives in Boston, was telling me that she attended, they go to a JCC, and one day when she was leaving, she brought her children to use the restroom, and she noticed that there were emergency packs in the bathroom. There was a backpack, and on the backpack was a little laminated inventory that said everything that was inside the backpack. And you had food and water in case people needed to shelter in place. You had tourniquets. You had bandages. I mean, these are not the JCCs that I grew up with. All right, things are changing, and you know, I think to a certain extent it's good that people feel empowered to take steps to protect their own safety. But she was asking me, is this the new normal? So when you consider the impact that a hate crime can have on an entire community, it really becomes a crime that is akin to terrorism, and that's why the FBI takes it so seriously. So when does the FBI get involved in investigating hate crimes? We can get involved when a local jurisdiction asks us to become a part of their investigation, or we can investigate unilaterally when there is what we believe a clear violation of federal law. And we can talk a little bit about the nuances of federal law in a minute. But when we do get involved, what do we bring to the table? And this is going to sound a little bit like me tooting my own horn. I'm not. I'm just saying that I happen to work for an organization that has incredible resources. So we have field offices in every state. And we have a few states where we have multiple field offices. I think we have 56 total. So we are national in every sense of the word. But we're also international because we have legal attaches that represent the Bureau to the international community. So I believe in the case of the JCC bomb threat subject, we worked with our legal attache in Tel Aviv to liaise with Israeli authorities to bring about an arrest in that case. And then just domestically, we have scientists, we have psychologists, we have evidence response technicians, we have statisticians, we have polygraphers, we have analysts who not only help us at the tactical ground level with our cases, but they also observe national trends. So if, for instance, we're seeing enrollments in white supremacy organizations increase, our analysts will try to find an answer to that question, why is this happening? If bad guys are figuring out new methods of communicating using technology, that's something that our analysts would pick up on. But when it comes to investigating hate crimes, I think our greatest resource is local law enforcement. Because when you call 911, it's a local officer who responds. It's not the FBI, it's a local officer, and then we get involved at a later stage. And by the way, to that point of the locals being so vital for our hate crime investigations, there are certain ways in which local jurisdictions actually have broader latitude to prosecute hate crimes. So I already mentioned race, religion, gender, sexual orientation, disability, and there's probably one or two others that I'm forgetting. But in Seattle, for instance, if you're homeless, you are considered part of a protected class. And if someone perpetrates a crime on you for no other reason than you're homeless and they harbor a bias towards that group, that subject would be prosecuted according to the laws of King County, which cover homeless individuals. You're also protected based on your age in Seattle. Think of elder abuse. You're also protected by way of your parental status. Your political ideology is protected. So this is all to say that if the feds don't get involved in a hate crime, it doesn't mean that a hate crime hasn't been committed, and it doesn't mean that justice can't be delivered. It just means that there's a more direct, more expedient avenue, and that would be through local prosecution. Now, there are some factors that make certain crimes more suitable for federal prosecution. Interstate commerce is one. Conspiracy is another. That is, if more than one person conspired to deprive someone of their civil rights. So when you think about the FBI's history in investigating hate crimes, it really dates back to the Civil Rights era, and I don't think that's a surprise to anyone. It dates back to the late 50s and early 60s. How many of you have seen Mississippi Burning? Good movie. Right? Don't you wish that all FBI agents could be like Gene Hackman was? He just got things done. So that was a true story. I mean, I'm sure creative liberties were taken, but that was the case in Neshoba County, Mississippi, where in 1963, three civil rights workers were murdered. And unfortunately, in my view, the sentences that the subjects received were really effectively amounted to a slap on the wrist, and that's because we did not have effective federal hate crime statutes, and there was no way they were going to be convicted at the local level. So I think they received sentences ranging from 3 to 6 years. But later, when new hate crime legislation was enacted, I believe one of the ringleaders was prosecuted according to U.S. Code Title 18, 249, and he effectively received the right sentence. So in that case, justice caught up eventually, but in the 50s and 60s, hate crime legislation just isn't what it is today. And we can sort of talk about the evolution of hate crime legislation briefly. And we'll talk about it as it pertains to religious institutions as well. So it was not until 1968 that President Johnson and the Congress enacted any sort of meaningful hate crime legislation. And I'll read from the statute. The 1968 statute made it a crime to use or threaten to use force to willfully interfere with any person because of race, color, religion, national origin, and because the person is participating in a federally protected activity, such as public education, employment, jury service, and so on. So you had to be participating in a federally protected activity, which doesn't do much for you if you're sitting in your living room and a Klansman tosses a bomb through your kitchen window. But it was the 60s, and since then, hate crime legislation has evolved. Later on in the 60s, you saw legislation involving housing rights and people not being able to discriminate against folks based on their race, color, religion, sex, or national origin. But right away, when you hear those words, race, color, religion, sex, national origin, you don't hear gender, right? It was a different time. You don't hear gender identity. And these are some of the protected classes that would make their way into more current hate crime legislation. So after 1968, nothing happens for about 30 years. And then in 96, and I think this is the law that's probably most applicable to JCANA, Congress passed the Church Arson Prevention Act, which makes it a crime to deface, damage, destroy, or otherwise alter religious property or interfere with a person's religious practices in situations affecting interstate commerce. I just want to get back to interstate commerce and talk a little bit about what that means. A lot of people say, if something terrible has happened, you can't see it, but there's so many cables back here, I probably stepped on the wrong one.
Oh, no, that's wireless.
Hello?
Yeah, go ahead.
Testing, testing. Okay, so interstate commerce. You're probably thinking, something terrible has happened. Why do we need to prove interstate commerce to make a federal case of it? I'd happen to agree with you. I'm not a legal historian. I'm not a historian, so I won't wade into those issues. What I will say is that it is not difficult to prove interstate commerce, especially in the 21st century. Before I started working hate crimes, I worked crimes against children in a smaller office in Washington. And I had some subjects who never even left the state of Washington. They would just sit there in their basements using the internet to victimize children. And because the internet is nothing more than a series of interconnected computers that traverse state lines, there's your interstate nexus. If you have a headstone that was manufactured outside the state where your cemetery is, and someone uses a sledgehammer, which may have also been manufactured outside the state where your cemetery is, to deface it, there's your interstate commerce. If someone uses spray paint to draw swastikas on a synagogue wall, and that spray paint was manufactured outside the state where the synagogue is, interstate commerce. So it's very, very easy to prove interstate commerce, and I think we pride ourselves on being very, very thoughtful in terms of how we choose to apply that statute to hate crimes. And have any of you, or do any of you work for cemeteries that have been defaced? And where are you from?
St. Louis.
St. Louis. Okay, so that was this year?
Yeah.
Okay, anyone else?
Outside San Francisco.
Outside San Francisco. Was that also this year?
No, about 20 years ago.
Okay. I know recently Philadelphia was hit, Rochester, New York was hit, and probably a few others that I'm missing. Has anyone from the FBI spoken to you? Okay. My understanding is that the FBI is involved in those investigations, and if they're not directly involved, they're indirectly involved by way of their work with the local investigators. But it's the Church Arson Prevention Act that gives them the authority to investigate. And just because I think it's relevant to you, I'll talk about penalties. As much as I would like to lock up and throw away the key for anyone who defaced a cemetery, if all that happened was property damage, then the most we can sentence them with is misdemeanor hate crime. It's still a hate crime, it's still serious, but they won't do any more than a year in jail, and they won't have to do anything more than pay a fine. But if someone was injured while they were defacing religious property, the penalty goes up significantly. So if bodily injury occurs, it's 20 years. If bodily injury occurs and arson or explosive devices were used, it goes up to 40 years. And if someone loses their life as a result of the defacement of religious property, then the sentence would be a life sentence. So just know that there are federal penalties. And depending on the state you're in, there are also extreme local, I don't want to say extreme, strong, strict, righteous local penalties. So we talked about the Church Arson Prevention Act. The next major piece of hate crime legislation is the Byrd-Shepard Hate Crimes Prevention Act, which was passed in 2009. Is anyone familiar with that? Okay. What that did was it eliminated certain jurisdictional and legal hurdles in investigating hate crimes. So whereas before someone needed to be participating in a federally protected activity, the 2009 statute said you don't have to be participating in a federally protected activity. You don't have to be voting. You don't have to be enjoying a public accommodation for an incident to be a federal hate crime. And more importantly, it also added certain protected classes, such as sexual orientation and gender identity, and those classes were not in previous statutes. And when I was talking to Dave, who will speak to you next, from Vancouver PD, I think he said it was 2004 that you guys included gender and sexual orientation? Sexual orientation. Okay, so
Canada's been there for a long time.
Okay, so once again, Canada is leading the vanguard, and we're following suit. I think the most notable conviction using the statute that I just talked about, the newest statute, US Code 249, was Dylan Roof. Have you all heard of Dylan Roof? Yeah, he was the white supremacist who murdered 9 people in South Carolina. He was prosecuted under 249. Now, he could have been prosecuted under a litany of different charges, federal or local, but it was 249, and he received the death penalty. And I'd also like to just briefly cover, a hate crime versus a hate incident. The First Amendment covers free speech, right? And it covers some what can be pretty hateful and pretty inexcusable speech, but speech that is nonetheless legal. Where it becomes a hate crime is when a prosecutor can demonstrate that it was not just speech, but it was a threat, or it was moving into threat territory. It crosses a certain line, and where that line is obviously depends on the circumstances. But I mean, do you think that the FBI wants to hear about someone who just decides, maybe they're not going to deface a Jewish cemetery, but they don't like the fact that Jewish cemeteries exist? Do you think the Bureau is interested in hearing about that? Yes. Yes, we are. Absolutely. Maybe it doesn't rise to the level of the 911 call because you can't articulate an emergency, but you should still let law enforcement know, and you should still let the Bureau know, because the people who are making these kinds of threats today are the people who are making good on those threats tomorrow. And that's something that we're very sensitive to. Particularly our agents who work counterterrorism matters, they'll receive information, and this is because post 9/11 we're living in such a reactive world, but they'll receive information that someone was spouting off on Facebook or other social media, using hate speech or making what, maybe they don't amount to threats, but they amount to statements that we need to investigate to rule out these individuals as someone who might do something really, really bad. Do you think their attitude might change when a few FBI agents show up at their door, place of business, 6 in the morning, with a bunch of questions? Absolutely. So let us know. If you see something, say something. It's a cliche, but the one thing that the Bureau is fantastic at doing, we're good at doing a lot of things, but the one thing that we're fantastic at doing is taking information, putting it into our database, and then going back to it later when it becomes relevant because a crime has been committed. Now, unfortunately, the Bureau is not in the business of providing security advice or guidance, but I do work with the Department of Homeland Security, and the Department of Homeland Security is doing really good at 2 things. They're good at hassling you at the airport. That'll be the only DHS joke for the duration of the presentation. But they're actually very, very good at providing free site security surveys. And I have colleagues in Homeland Security Investigations, which is a sub-agency of the Department of Homeland Security, who are, I believe their job title is Public Security Advisor. And for no money, they will come to your cemetery or to your synagogue, and they will give you advice on how to make it safer. And while they can't endorse, oh, you should use this security system or this security company over that security company, they can give you some feedback that it seems basic, but then when you implement it, you see a pretty significant change. A public safety advisor with Homeland Security was telling me that he went to a synagogue in Seattle, and there was a particular wall that seems like every year, annually, it was a tradition for some jerk to deface this wall. What can you do about it? Security cameras, guards, how do you stop them from spray painting? And he said, I would put rose bushes in. I would make it thorny and painful and not worth someone's time to go spray paint that wall. And from what I've heard, a simple solution like that works. I can't give you that advice. DHS can give you that advice. He was telling me another story about a beautiful rock garden in a separate synagogue. But they had stones that were, you could chuck one of these stones through a window and cause some pretty serious damage, and that's what people had done. To get smaller rocks. It's so simple, but these are people, this is their field, they are expert at this. I would strongly advise, if you have security concerns, give the Department of Homeland Security a call. or you can call the FBI and we can put you in touch with the right people. I just want to read you some statistics. We publish a uniform crime report annually, and we collect information from about 15,000 law enforcement agencies, it's a huge data project, but every year they come out with some interesting statistics. So in 2015, does anyone want to guess what percentage of hate crimes were motivated by race, ethnicity, ancestry bias? Anyone want to guess? What was that? 70. 70. Anyone else?
35.
Anyone else?
20.
Someone said 50. 56%. 56% were motivated by race, ethnicity, ancestry bias. Between religion and sexual orientation, who wants to guess at the next highest percentage? Religion, exactly. 21.4% were prompted by a religious bias. I don't know what you do with any of these statistics except say, oh, things are better than we thought, things are worse than we thought. Of the race, ethnicity crimes that we discussed, what percentage was motivated by anti-Black or anti-African American bias?
Is this for the U.S.?
For the United States. 80? 52%. For religious bias, okay, between anti-Jewish crimes and anti-Muslim crimes, who thinks it's like weird? Are we winning or are we losing?
Yeah.
The majority of hate crimes between anti-Jewish crimes and anti-Muslim crimes. Does anyone want to venture a guess?
Muslim, way more out there.
Who says Muslim? Who says Jewish? Jewish.
Really?
Jewish. 51.3%.
Go back to what they know.
That surprised me.
Anti-Islamic crime was 22%. 4.4% were anti-Catholic, and then two smaller groups. There was one other stat that stood out to me. The majority of the 2,338 hate crime offenses that were crimes against property were acts of destruction, damage, vandalism. So, in closing, I want to say I work with many different communities. Lately, it's been the Sikh community because someone from the Sikh community was shot in my jurisdiction. You may have also heard that an Indian man was killed in Kansas, and it was very similar circumstances. Someone said, go back to your own country, and then shot him. In that case, the victim died. What I see is that certain people have become inured to these threats. They're used to it, right? And rather than take time out of their day to call 911 or let the FBI know about it, and I understand it can be a nuisance, they just prefer to move forward. And Dave and I were actually talking about this before the conference began. They have a tendency to move forward. What's in the past is in the past. There are ignorant people in the world. I'm just going to ignore them. And even though there's a big part of me that admires that, you have to report. We have to know about what's going on. I think that what we're seeing is only the tip of the iceberg. I think there's a lot more, particularly with respect to the Sikh and Islamic communities. They're just, either they're used to it or they're afraid to report. I've had people tell me that the reason I don't talk to the FBI is because I don't have legal status in this country and I'm afraid you're going to deport me. Absolutely not the case. So it's not so much an issue with the Jewish community, at least in Seattle. That's what I can speak to. I know that the Jewish community in Seattle, and I would suspect nationally, is very, very well connected, and they communicate with each other very, very well. If there's something that happens at a synagogue in New York, it's a microsecond before synagogues in California are alerted. So you're doing the right thing. Keep doing what you're doing. Do you have any questions?
Carrie.
This may seem like a loaded question, but I apologize. There's a public perception with the new administration in Washington that there's been a rise in anti-Semitic activity in the United States. What are your feelings about that?
I think it's a great question. I I don't know if because of the new administration, certain people feel more emboldened than they otherwise would. But I do know that it's something that nationally we're more sensitive to. So I haven't studied the data. I don't know if more hate crimes are occurring or if it just feels like more hate crimes are occurring. But that does not affect the intensity with which we approach our investigations.
Bill?
Do you liaise with the RCMP at all?
We do. So we have legal attaches in Toronto, Vancouver. They routinely share intelligence, not on hate crime cases, but on other like crimes against children cases I've dealt with RCMP.
So there's an organization that was put together about 10 years ago by JFDA, Jewish Federations of North America. The letters of SCN, Secure National
Community Network.
That's right, Community Network, SCN. And they will come to your community and work with you to look at your situation and give recommendation. And I know that, in Scottsdale, I'm from Arizona, and they brought them in, and one of the first things they suggested for our campus was that we hire a security official. And they hired, was a former SWAT team member, a guy who's quite well informed about these sort of things. And they're doing $500,000 worth of improvements to the Jewish community campus based on his recommendations, including updating the software that's being used to the entrance door, and making sure that everyone that uses the building, all the agencies in the building, know what to do in the case of a lockdown or an emergency or this sort of thing. They're raising the walls around the preschool, yard. And there's all sorts of things that are being done, and I've had him come to our cemetery to take a look at where we sit and what our risks are. And that sort of service, that community network service that was established, is out there for anyone to use in the United States.
Okay. And everyone knows about that? They know how to get in contact?
I would hope so.
Good point.
Yeah, it's called CSI, it's through the Federation.
SCN, Secure Community Network.
I'll talk a little bit about it.
Okay. We
That's
want to,
wonderful.
we want to make sure that we're going to have a panel discussion in a few minutes, and that's going to be highly interactive with everybody. So, if you have any quick questions specific to Greg's presentation, now's the time to get the last one in. If not, then we'll continue this conversation at the panel, because we don't want to miss we don't want to miss the panel session. So we're good?
Great. Thank you.